It's over. Those were the words from President Donald Trump regarding the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States. But as negotiations continue, is the lasting deal still within reach? And how will the ultimate outcome of the war impact President Trump's legacy? This week on UpFront, I'll be asking those questions to former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, Heino Klinck. Heino Klinck, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
My pleasure.
President Trump recently announced that the United States' memorandum of understanding with Iran is over, although he said U.S. negotiators can continue if they want. Both sides throughout this entire process have accused the other of violating the agreement. Donald Trump, however, and J.D. Vance and others have been claiming victory. You served in the Pentagon during the first Trump administration. What do you make of Donald Trump's claims of victory, and how do we even measure success?
Well, let me just first say that I think the MOU was always a very, very fragile document. And I think it was meant to give both the United States and Iran an opportunity to step back from the kinetic part of the operation and to really enter into more substantive negotiations. But again, as soon as the MOU was announced, there were varying interpretations coming out of Tehran, coming out of Washington, and other world capitals. So I always thought it was a temporary measure. And again, we've seen, the most recent break in the ceasefire with Iran attacking 3 different vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. This is only the latest breach of a very obvious breach of the ceasefire. With respect to your questions about, measures of success, I would align myself with the president's statements that the number one measure of success is going to be that Iran does not have the capability to acquire a nuclear device. I think that has to remain, obviously, first and foremost. And then I think secondarily, that the Strait of Hormuz needs to reopen to international commerce. I think those are the basics.
So that's where things get interesting, because it seems many of those measures would have this looking like anything but a success. I mean, in many ways, Iran was able to hold off 2 nations that have nuclear capabilities. They control the Strait of Hormuz. They're able to dictate global financial markets in ways that maybe they didn't even realize before. It looks like a failure.
Yeah, I would probably argue with that assessment. So let's look at things, or try to look at things objectively, from a military perspective. And fundamentally, most of my experience has been in the military and defense arena. The Iranian military capacity today is a shadow of what it was before Operation Epic Fury was launched. So we know everything the president has said, and it's been true. It is true. The Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea. Their ability to launch missiles and drones has been severely degraded. And again, if you look at the metrics of what they were able to do.
Degraded, but still, they're still capable.
You're never going to be able to get every single drone. You're never ever get every single missile. But the capability has been significantly degraded. And I think no one will quibble with that. However, of course, when they are able to launch a drone against Bahrain or launch a missile against Kuwait, it's going to make headlines. But I would say, from a military perspective, again, separate from diplomatic and political, from a military.
Well, that's the thing. When we talk about success, the military part, to your point, was sort of undeniable. The U.S. has the power to degrade, Iran's military capacity. But if we're talking about global economic stability, diplomatic successes, if we're talking about, developing a regional ally or at least stopping more bloodshed, it seems like we've moved in the wrong direction in every way.
Again, I would not necessarily agree with that assessment. So economically, certainly we have seen that Iran has leverage by being able to control the Strait of Hormuz. That has to be addressed, absolutely.
Not to interrupt you, but it seemed like Trump didn't anticipate that. I mean, he said their response, Iran's response, was different than he anticipated. He seemed to have underestimated what was going to happen.
So I certainly, that's what the president has said. He said other things since then as well. So, let's take him at his word for whatever reason. I can tell you that there's no contingency plan or operations plan that I had ever been exposed to with respect to contingencies involving Iran, where the Strait of Hormuz was not a major factor in our planning. So, but let's also say, again, very clearly, that Iran has been able to control the Strait more through the threat of the use of force than the actual use of force, okay? Because international shippers obviously don't want to take the risk of losing a ship going through the Strait, and international insurance rates have skyrocketed. But the Iranian ability to actually control through actual use of force, that has not been tested yet. And I would argue that the United States military, if needed, could actually control the Strait of Hormuz through a variety of means.
Like what?
Well, I think, first of all, not just degrading, but destroying all of Iranians' capabilities along the Strait to launch offensive strikes against vessels, both kinetically and through the use of cyber and other tools. If need be, actually taking an island in the Strait, not Karg Island up north, but in the Strait of Hormuz itself. There are a lot of things the U.S. could do. Hopefully, is not required.
I was going to say, if you're to control oil markets, blowing up more land, taking over more land, killing more people seems like...
You have to remember, military is meant to be able to implement political and diplomatic objectives. Okay, the military is
within the bounds of international law.
Of course, obviously, and the United States military operates within the bounds of international law.
That's where I'll beg to disagree. We'll revisit that.
Certainly. So again, if the president gives the order for the United States military to actually be able to control the Strait, I believe the U.S. military is capable of doing that. Yeah. But again, that is,
it's the at what cost question.
Certainly
that becomes
certainly. But again, and this is another piece of the puzzle, of course, as well. I don't think the president wants to go back to major military operations. However, the United States is still able to do that because we have not seen the withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region, since the signing of the MOU. We still have lots of forces forward deployed there.
Yeah. With respect to the MOU, not only have we seen some goals maybe not get met, but we've also seen Trump back away from some of the purported aims. Regime change, his initial reason for starting the war, he now says he never cared about. Iran still has the same stockpile of highly enriched uranium that it had last year, which Trump now says he's in no rush to get rid of. And he has backed off his calls for zero enrichment, which was something that he'd earlier said. Trump also now says it's okay if Iran has ballistic missiles. He said, quote, "Missiles aren't the problem." How do you square this?
So I think the president is the master of strategic flexibility. I think he is, in fact, a master negotiator. Yeah. And when you're negotiating, as much as you may not want to admit it publicly, you sometimes have to, in fact, move the goalposts. But I think I think you do. Yes, absolutely.
Can you be transparent and honest and concede that, hey, this isn't working, so we're going to compromise? As opposed to, I never said that?
So I think, and again, I'm not an expert on, liberal democracies or the political process. From the military perspective, it's obviously much, much different. And the military operates in a black and white world with reasonable objective standards. Yeah. So, but the military, again, is one tool in the president's toolbox. And it's not up for the military to make the types of pronouncements the president and the commander-in-chief make. So I think, again, substantively on the ground, you cannot argue with the military successes that the U.S. has had against Iran. The Iranian military capability to launch offensive strikes is significantly degraded.
Earlier we were talking about the U.S. military operating within the boundaries of international law. I want to revisit that for a moment. During Trump's NATO summit remarks, he threatened to destroy Iran's bridges, its electric plants, and its desalination plants, all of which would be in violation of international law. And even after signing the MOU, he threatened Iranian negotiators. He even threatened the entire country's existence. These threats of annihilation, which he's made before, they're certainly not signs of diplomatic achievement, but it goes further than that. He's threatening war crimes. He's threatening genocide. how do we square that with this idea of operating within international law and also getting to an effective outcome?
So, candidly, we could spend days talking about everything the president has said. But let's focus on some very specifics with respect to going after critical infrastructure in Iran, potentially. Critical infrastructure can and is, in fact, a viable military target if it's used to supply military forces. Okay, so again, I'm not an international lawyer, but there have been plenty of examples, legal examples, throughout modern warfare where militaries have targeted critical infrastructure, and all those things you cited are, in fact, critical infrastructure.
They could be, right? It's the same argument.
That's right.
It's the same, but they're not as such. It's the same thing when they argue, oh, there's a terrorist. Hamas is hiding in the basement of a hospital, so we had to blow it up. You can't blow up a hospital. So there's always this asterisk, and then somehow all the asterisks show up at their military targets. You would agree that you can't blow up bridges and electric plants and desalination plants just because you want to.
That's correct. You have to have justification. And U.S. military planning, when plans like that are put together, there's actually a military legal review that is involved as well.
And saying you're going to destroy an entire country.
So I think some of that might be hyperbole.
Okay, so it's he's threatening war crimes, but not really going to do them.
So I don't think he's threatening war crimes. I think, again, if you look at the specific things he said with respect to critical infrastructure, you can make a case, a legal case.
Here's what he said, so we don't, I want to be clear, from the NATO summit. I would say in one day we knocked down every single bridge in Iran. Not some bridges, not specific targets. Every single bridge in Iran, there's not a thing they can do about it. There are electric manufacturing facilities. There are electric plants. If we have to, we will take them out. They have desalination plants. We will take them out if we have to. This idea of doing all of it is where it becomes illegal. As we know, things like power plants are needed to meet people's daily needs. It's needed to support the general citizenry. That's not something you can just blow up.
Well, power plants are, in fact, an absolute legitimate military target
because they power it.
Yeah, and again, there's not one military campaign that I'm aware of in modern history, and I think, for instance, the campaign against Serbia, where that, back in the 90s, where that wasn't at the top of the target list because military power is needed also for the military.
How about bridges? Saying you're going to blow up every single bridge in a country.
So again,
is that plausible?
I think every single bridge is hyperbole, okay? And I think what we need to be able to do is match the president's rhetoric with actual action.
You would agree that if he were to do that, that would be a war crime?
I don't think that blowing up every single bridge in any country is viable for a variety of reasons.
But you'd agree it would be a war crime?
I would have to see the actual specifics. So every single bridge, again...
Is there any country in the world where every single bridge could be a viable military target at once in one day?
It depends on the size of the country, quite frankly.
How about a country the size of Iran?
So again, I would tell you that you have to match the rhetoric with the actions.
Right, but if the actions matched, would that be a war crime?
So again, with with President Trump, okay, if you take all of his words at face value, okay, I don't think that you would be able to find any justification for everything that he says 100% of the time. Okay.
For sure. And so, I'm going to give you one more chance.
Yeah.
In this specific case, if he follows through on his rhetoric, in this instance, would he be committing a war crime?
I don't think he's going to, so I think it's more of a rhetorical question than anything else.
One accomplishment of the war Trump pointed to is Iran's commitment to never have a nuclear weapon. But Iran already committed to that for 2 decades. And both U.S. intelligence and the UN's nuclear watchdog, they've repeatedly said that Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon. What evidence is there that this war has changed Iran's nuclear posture?
Well, I think fundamentally the fact that the enriched uranium is now appears to be in locations where the Iranians can't access it, for one thing, due to the kinetic strikes. So that's, I think, the main thing. I think the issue with the Iranian proclamations and declarations has been that the level at which the Iranians have enriched uranium is much higher than for the stated objectives that they've had. And I believe their stated objectives over the year have been primarily for civilian research, medical research, and the like. And the enrichment level is much beyond that. And the significance of that is that this gives them, or gave them, a breakout capability to enrich it even further to get to a level that could potentially provide it for military use. The other piece, I think,
So it wasn't imminent, it just was...
well, it depends on how you define imminent, to be perfectly honest. But the other piece, and I think
imminent's pretty clear.
But let me make another point, because I think there's two components to a threat, military threat. One is the capability, okay?
Yeah.
The other issue, which I think is just as important, is intent. Have we seen examples of Iran developing weapons or utilizing other elements of national power to do harm to Americans, Israelis, and others? And that intent has been clear since 1979.
One thing you can do is come up with a nuclear deal that monitors their uranium enrichment and their development, that has regular inspections, and that has international bodies making sure that that doesn't happen. That was in place. And according to all those people, Iran didn't pose a nuclear threat. So why would Donald Trump stand up and say that they did?
Well,
is that more hyperbole?
So, again, the president cited U.S. intelligence, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that we still don't know, to justify Operation Epic Fury, to go after the Iranian capabilities. And again, the strikes were not just meant to put another nail in the coffin of their nuclear capability, but it was also meant to degrade their ballistic missile threat, which again has been degraded significantly. So there are a variety of objectives for that.
I'm even confused about that, because he told us that they'd already obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities last June.
Yes, he did.
So if that's true, right, and I'm hearing what you're not saying as well, if Donald Trump just says stuff sometimes, like we obliterated the nuclear capacity, even though he didn't, or he didn't need to because they never had it, either way, then why do you trust him when he says, well, I have intelligence that led me to the intervention in Iran? Because part of what you just said is there are things that we don't know that Trump knows, that he's told us he knows, and he just hasn't given the details about. Why do we know he's not lying again?
So again, I think you're basing your questions and your comments on this premise of he's lying. Okay, so I don't.
Or being hyperbolic.
I certainly would say he certainly can be hyperbolic. Absolutely, I would say many foreign leaders have done that in the past. As a matter of fact, many American presidents have done that in the past as well. And I would say that fundamentally what he has done, for whatever, and whether or not the objectives were clearly stated, not clearly stated, consistent or inconsistent, one thing is for certain. Iran posed a regional threat prior to Epic Fury that it does not possess today. And I think at the end of the day, that is the major success.
But that can't be enough, can it? I mean, by that logic, someone could go into Israel and do the same thing and say, well, they pose a threat to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank,
so again,
Gaza.
So it obviously depends on your perspective. I would not share
how
that
much power
perspective.
you have.
Well,
you'd agree they have the power to do it. They just did it.
So the question of power is something that's been with us since biblical times and before. That aspect of the human dimension and how nations and peoples will interact is not going to change, as idealistic as we may want to be.
Yeah.
So with respect to Iran, though, again, I will argue every day for the positive outcome of ensuring that they, under no circumstances, have a nuclear capability that can evolve into an offensive weapon, as well as taking out their military capability to the greatest extent possible to launch strikes against their neighbors.
But some of the aspects of the deal where we are now, that he's gotten into a strategic flexibility, don't look that different than what we would have had if he had just not pulled out of the initial Iran deal. Is that fair?
I think there are some that could make that argument.
Would those who make that argument be correct?
Some aspects of it, perhaps, yes. But I think that there's, the other issue though here is, again, and I realize that there has been perhaps not the greatest consistency in how the administration has conveyed objectives of the military campaign.
Yes.
So you have the nuclear issue, which we've talked about at length.
Yeah.
But and you also have the Iranian capability to project power, primarily through its ballistic missile forces, which, although are not at zero, have been degraded significantly.
Although Trump says he doesn't care if they have ballistic missiles.
I mean, we could spend days talking about everything that the president has said and not said, and
Trump
then
says,
resaid.
I mean, this is bizarre to me. The thing that he said was a non-negotiable. I have to get rid of that. Oh, we didn't get rid of it? I never cared about that in the first place. It seems like if he wins, it worked. If it didn't win, it never happened.
Can you name one president who wouldn't do that?
Well, that's
who hasn't said that?
And that's precisely why, at least on this show, we looked at Biden, and we had the same critiques.
Yeah.
We looked at Obama, had the same critiques.
Because I think if you look at the Biden administration's first 2 years in foreign and defense policy, and you compare them to the Trump administration's first 2 years, the United States is in a much, much better and safer place.
Not with regard to Iran, though, many would argue.
Well, I don't, so I would even argue that we are in a better place because Iran is unable to fund Hezbollah, they're unable to fund Hamas, they're unable to fund the Houthis, and their capability to launch offensive strikes is significantly less now than it was back then.
Let's talk about NATO. The NATO summit took place this week, and it came at a particularly fraught moment for the alliance. Trump lashed out at members for refusing to join the war and renewed his threats to withdraw from NATO altogether. Now, you've openly called for NATO members to step up their supportive rhetoric in this specific war. What do you make of the division between Trump and NATO?
So I think President Trump has always seen NATO as an unequal alliance. And by that, the issue of burden sharing is not new. President Eisenhower talked about it, so it's not new. But I think the president...
He's called it a one-sided path, I believe.
But I'm sure he's had other colorful ways of describing it.
That was the nice version.
And I think, again, most objective observers would not disagree that the burden has been significantly higher on the United States, from a financial perspective, from the perspective of military force posture in the least, as well as that NATO's rhetoric has oftentimes not matched their actions, okay? But let me also say, because I, having served, in formations in NATO and having spent, a good chunk of my life living in Europe, I'm a believer in the alliance. But I also believe, and I think history has shown time and time again, that, there are some NATO countries that are not going to spend the requisite amount that they need to on their own defense unless they are, in essence, browbeat by the United States to do so.
But many NATO members themselves are saying Trump is not a reliable ally anymore. The global belief in the United States being a security guarantee is at an all-time low. Trump's threatening to annex Greenland, and he said that in the past, but he's reiterated it very recently. The high tariffs, all this stuff has made the United States seem like an unreliable partner. If he wants us to be a two-way street, it seems like he's operating in the opposite of that. It seems like he's antagonizing members of NATO.
So I think, again, part of the president's persona, and some might even argue part of his strength, is to use the force of his personality to get counterparts to do what needs to be done. When we talk about NATO and defense spending, there is absolutely no excuse for NATO partners to not spend the requisite amount that they agreed to.
Yeah.
Let's think about this. In 2014, they agreed on 2%.
Yeah.
And it took an invasion, a Russian invasion of Ukraine, to get some of them to spend 2%. And they were still dragging their feet. So, there's no excuse for that.
According to the Pew poll, across 36 countries, a median of 23% of adults have confidence in U.S. President Trump to do the right thing regarding world affairs. Confidence in Trump is lower than confidence in French President Macron, Ukrainian President Zelensky, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Well, fortunately, the president is not running for re-election internationally. At the NATO summit this week, The United States, as well as the other 31 member nation states, have all committed again to Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause. So let there be no doubt that the American security guarantee of a multilateral alliance is still very, very clear.
Heino Klinck, thank you so much for joining me at UpFront.
Thank you.